What are you doing?
Replaying my earlier games.
What on earth for?
Looking for weaknesses in my play.
I see. And?
There aren't any.
Back to Box Popcast, the weekly pseudo-academic roundtable pop culture analysis with drinking and swearing. My name is Christopher Maverick, but you can call me Mav, and I am once again here with my co-host, Katya Kārkliņa. How's it going, Katya?
You know, it's, I feel like we need a new thing to ask in 2020. I feel like asking how's it going is a very loaded question. Especially we're recording this the week of Christmas, which I feel like I've just seen the reports rolling in of like everyone's Christmases are weird this year.
Yeah.
You know.
But it's the last show of the year for us, and so we should be happy because 2020 is ending and everything is going to be magically better. Like that's what I read on the internet. It's just
because that's totally how time works and calendars. Because those totally are not just social constructions.
Yep,
just
linear time's a myth, and we're going to have magic's going to happen, and the universe is going to be better by the time people hear this. Right? That's how it's going to work.
I hope that it's better by the time people hear us. I don't know if there's going to be a sudden break at midnight on New Year's Eve that suddenly COVID is no longer a reality and the world poofs into like a magical utopia with unicorns and pie. But I will hold out for that possibility. Technically, in the continuum of the universe, all things are possible.
One would hope. Well, okay, so we have a I think an interesting show today because we've been doing these Christmas shows, and then we had one topic that we wanted to get to that wasn't Christmassy. So we're fitting that in the end of the year because it was relevant right now. But what are we talking about today?
I mean, basically, I was looking for an excuse to talk about the Queen's Gambit, which should surprise no one because, of course, the Queen's Gambit was released by Netflix as a limited series in, I believe, the end of October.
Something like that.
And quickly became like the thing to watch. And of course, I want to talk about it because 1960s fashion and nerds, which, are two of my things. They didn't fit in video games, although there is kind of some virtual reality stuff going on vis-a-vis potential psychosis. So, I mean, really, it is actually all of my interests bundled into one show. And it also is in one neatly tight season. So my short attention span is also gratified. But basically, I want to talk about that because I think that there's been, for a limited series, I think that there's a lot to talk about, from like some of the racial stuff to class to the way it presents substance abuse, mental illness, all kinds of stuff. It's a pretty substantive show.
It was good. It was really good.
And it was good. Yes, it was tight television, which Netflix is increasingly good at. Yeah.
So regular listeners are going to notice that so far they've only heard, my voice and your voice. That is not, a lot of times that means that the other two hosts are not interested in the topic. That was not the case this time. Wayne and Hannah are both enjoying the show, but neither of them finished it in time to record. So we couldn't
want to inflict themselves to spoilers.
Right. So we are avoiding spoilers for them, but that means, we're going to talk spoilers on our episode today. So pause this, then go write us a 5-star review on iTunes, subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit like button, all that stuff. And then go watch the show in its entirety. Come back and listen to this show because, now I'm not saying don't listen to our show. I'm saying, make sure you're caught up or decide that you don't care about spoilers and listen to us either way. But we don't have Wayne. We don't have Hannah. So we needed some guests. So we each brought one. Who'd you bring?
So I have Anastasia, who's currently a PhD candidate at Duke University, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Hey y'all, thanks so much for having me. As Katya mentioned, I am based at Duke University where I am a cultural researcher, completing my PhD in cultural studies and critical theory, and I specialize specifically in Black studies and feminist theory, which is another way to say that I like to think about race, gender, and class in US culture.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds familiar.
Right. And one of the reasons I wanted Anastasia on the show is because actually we were having a conversation about the Queen's Gambit on LinkedIn and sort of like the whole phenomenon of this show inspiring like a resurgence in interest in chess, which also, as the game person, I guess technically this does have all my interest. It has games in it, even though I'm not a chess player. Chess confuses me, if I'm perfectly honest. Yeah, and so I thought, I want to pick her brain about all the things she thinks about the show.
What I got from that was, I was like, you use LinkedIn to talk to people?
I do occasionally use LinkedIn.
Wow. I use LinkedIn to log into once every 6 months and accept all my notifications of, so-and-so has tried to friend you. Yeah, because I'm really bad.
Mav, who did you drag on the show?
I brought, like, as I frequently do, I brought my wife, Stephanie. Hey, Steph.
Hello.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
And Stephanie, well, you've been on the show several times before. So,
yes.
So just remind people what you do specifically. And
well, I have a PhD in cognitive psychology, so I study learning. And one of the things that made me interested in the show was that it was about chess and learning to play chess and what expertise involves. And there are several like famous papers written by people that are like 2 steps away from my academic circle who've written like famous papers on that. So I was interested in that. And I am a former chess. Well, I played chess a lot as a kid. I have kind of a little bit of a competitive streak in me. So I haven't played in a while because last time I played my cousin, I made a bad move and I ended up kicking the chessboard and it decapitated one of the bishops. So I haven't played much since then because I think I needed to work on my emotions. So I've been meditating since then. But anyway, I really enjoyed the show. So Mav didn't actually drag me on. I kind of volunteered, I guess,
to come on.
voluntarily
dragged on.
Yeah. But I kind of resisted watching the show at first because I thought it might show sort of a magical way of people becoming experts in chess. But then I verified with someone who watched it that wasn't the case. So then I watched it and I really enjoyed it. So I wanted to be on the show.
So for listeners, I'm going to tell a slightly embarrassing story about Stephanie. Not really.
That's okay.
Well,
only slightly.
No, it's come up on the show before, but so people know the kind of person you are. So you know how geeks, nerds always get well that's not accurate because it didn't, in reality chess works like that, people do that or you're not
going to say I did that, are you?
No,
okay.
Not well, yes, but not here. So just it's covering what you just said. Stephanie doesn't do that about say chess or the way superpowers work or saying something's realistic, but Stephanie's research is so important to her, and I think I've said this on the show before, that Steph hated the movie Inside Out when we saw it because she thought it was not scientifically accurate.
Because I imagined what I would do if I were making that movie, and it was completely different, and I was very disappointed.
So yes, the children's movie about little cartoon emotions in your brain was not scientifically accurate. And
it could have been done better, in my opinion.
So I thought Steph would be great because she actually understands things. Like one of the things that happens in this series is, among other things, there's her obsession with chess and then the ways in which she learns chess and she visualizes the game tree 18 billion steps ahead by looking at the ceiling, and just that entire process of thinking. I thought it would be interesting to hear Steph talk about that. So we're going to talk about a whole bunch of stuff today. We're going to talk about pretty much everything that we can think of from the show, because I've got a lot of thoughts on class and gender and race issues that happen throughout the show. There's things about fashion. There's the things about learning. There's the things about drug addiction, and the ways in which she sort of dealt with it. And all, these are all things that you touched on in the call for comments, Katya.
Yeah, I think and this, Anastasia, maybe you can jump in, because I think one of the things we were, on LinkedIn, Mav, having a conversation about was kind of what is so appealing about this show? Because it is aside from being aesthetically gorgeous and I think a really tight narrative arc, even though I think there's some flaws with the shows generally, it hit a chord. And I think when for those of you who read the blog post, part of my theory for that was the show is only kind of chess is the occasion for the show. It's not really about chess. A lot of the storyline is sort of around Beth, the main character, Beth Harmon, basically having these really radical ups and downs over her life. And part of it is also, I think was it 7 episodes?
It's 7 episodes.
Yeah. Like her entire, like her life from like being a young child up until like, I believe her like early 20s is compressed into 7 episodes. So part of it is it's like you're having like over 10 years of life experience compressed into a very small period. But it's basically taking you through a roller coaster of like high achievement, like horrible lows of like everything is going wrong, having a spiraling breakdown of substance abuse and like some mental things that are, you know, may or may not be tied entirely to substance abuse, unclear. And basically watching someone cope. And part of my theory is that, like, aside from this being, like, on the one hand, the show, I think, has this escapist fantasy of, like, very glamorous fashion and this sort of, like, period, like, very, very interesting, like, period aesthetic, which, you know, we see in things like Mad Men, I think people find cathartic on some level, while simultaneously also watch somebody basically dealing with not the same struggles everyone's dealing with in 2020, like very different ones. But I think that like, I do think a lot of viewers might see themselves in there because like, no matter how good 2020 has been for you, it's not probably been great. And I mean, even just looking at like, as much as like this show has inspired kind of a resurgence in, you know, Google searches for chess stuff, we're also seeing 2020 like record level interest in people pursuing mental health care. So a show and substance abuse, actually. And so I think it just kind of like speaks to people's experience right now. I don't know. Mm-hmm. I'm curious what other people's takes on like why it seems like this show is resonating. Because I am a little like, I feel like I'm simultaneously surprised and also not surprised that it's so popular.
I think there's a lot going on. I think that the way 2020 went down, our current cultural moment, where everyone, you know, a large percentage of the world, not even just the country, but the world, society at large, just became shut-ins. And so our shared experience went back to being about, you know, about things that we could consume and talk about online at the same time. So, I mean, I teased you about LinkedIn, but that's just because it's fun to make fun of LinkedIn. Me? Well, right. And you, yeah. but like, I imagine there was a point when the television universe was smaller, right? There was a point where everyone, like the next day, everyone wanted to talk about the season finale of MASH. The next day, everybody wanted to talk about who shot JR. The next day, everyone wanted to talk about Lucy and Desi having a baby, right? Like this, the television universe used to be very, very small, and that became water cooler conversation for the masses, right? And then as the television universe expands and becomes diversified, streaming takes hold, there are, you know, there's not just 3 channels. Anybody can watch whatever you want. Like, for instance, Stephanie, you are a big fan of like, Steph loves true crime docuseries, and like basically she talks about them with my mother because they're the only 2 people on the planet who watch this show. There's a whole network. There's a whole network, Investigation to Discovery, that is produced just for Steph and my mom to watch, and nobody else watches it. Ratings of 2. Well, no, but
sure,
carry the whole thing.
But it's a small niche thing, and you find little markets, right? But there used to be this world where just everybody had to watch the same thing because that's all there was, and that drove conversation. And now when we live in a world where we don't have real human interaction anymore because everybody's trapped inside, we are working from home, we've got Zoom. Our cultural touchstones right now aren't, oh, did you watch the Steelers game last night? Or, oh, how about that Avengers movie? Or like literally what we have to talk about is TV that we can all consume at our leisure at the same time. And I think that quality is not even the thing that matters as much. We've got Queen's Gambit, we had fucking Tiger King like 6 months ago, which was not good.
Oh, that's
it was a train wreck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was a train wreck. It was a train wreck we all wanted to watch.
Yes, exactly. It was that thing. So I think that there's a level of, we can have a community talking about this quirky psychodrama about chess, and then like find something that you're interested in. I'm interested in her trauma. I'm interested in the gender dynamic. I'm interested in exploring the sexuality of a young woman in the 1970s, the 60s and 70s. I'm interested in the racial dynamic. I'm interested in the drug dynamic. There's something to pick apart and talk about on shows like this, but also just, on your FaceTime call with your brother, Yeah,
I think maybe for me, the reason I was interested in it was I still have like lingering anger over the 2016 election. So I like to see movies where women triumph over men in traditional like men's worlds.
Did you know she was going to triumph before you started watching it though?
It would have been really disappointing if she hadn't. I did not know. No, I didn't.
Okay.
But I think
most people do. I think it's a very predictable show, and I think that's part of the appeal, though.
Yeah.
Okay, so Katya, you said it's not about chess, and it's not, right? Like this series is Rocky. It's every sports movie. Every sports movie is exactly this story, right? Like Bad News Bears, Rocky, Any Given Sunday, one of my favorites, a football movie. Like it doesn't matter what the sport is. The show is a person devoted to this one thing that they're good at. And sports becomes a metaphor for their triumph of human spirit over all the adversity in their life, right? And that's the story of Rocky. That's the story of Queen's Gambit. Rocky is interesting. It's one of the most famous sports movies ever made. It won an Academy Award. And what's amazing about Rocky is he fucking loses. Like he works, the story of Rocky, the original Rocky is he works his ass off. He works his way to the pinnacle. He does everything he can. He goes out there, he gives it his all, and Apollo beats him. That's how the first Rocky movie ends. And that actually is what happens in this. Now, this isn't just 1 2-hour movie. It's a 7-episode show. So they've got, 6 hours of content. And that actually happens at one point in this, right? Like she works and she goes to New York to the champ, I think it's in Paris when she just loses, she works her ass off and she still loses. And for Rocky, that's the end of the story. And I think you could have ended this here because the lesson becomes, sometimes you just aren't the best, but you're still better than 99.99999% of the planet. She could have lost to the Russians and she doesn't. But I think that's what makes the show interesting is like, it's still a cultural, it's a story about the triumph of the human spirit. And I don't think you have to know anything about chess in order to watch this show.
I just got excited about what I heard, the triumph of the human spirit, because I think that's how Katya and I connected in terms of, talking about Queen's Gambit. I'm really fascinated to think about genius as something that is constantly attractive to us through culture, right? Like that is something that, is very compelling to us. And I think there's something about this particular, social culture moment where so many of us are struggling, that there is something aspirational, something hopeful about, this underdog who is, actually a genius, right? And I think there's something to be said about Beth being an orphan, being traumatized, being kind of a loner, right? Who has this special, beautiful, brilliant part of her. And I think that, to me, as I'm quite critical of some of the aspects of the show, right? I myself, was in tears at the end, right? And was very moved by it. And I think even to Stephanie's point, I think there's something about, having that feminist hero, having that feminist underdog who kind of overcomes whatever obstacles are in her way, whether, structural, social, or internal, and then becomes this genius, this beacon of hope for us is super powerful. And I think that is something that I'm noticing on Netflix as well. You were talking, I was thinking of this other show that I watch now, which is Warrior Nun, which is also about a young woman who, is disabled, who's unable to walk. And then she gets, that gift. And I will not spoil it for you, but and then the mentor as well, Black woman as well in that show, comes along and sort of guides her to her quote unquote purpose.
Mm-hmm. And what I really appreciated about the show too was like my initial resistance was I didn't want it to be just about someone who's just like somehow naturally magically gifted at this particular activity, chess. I liked that I saw that she progressed through like hard work and lots of thought and lots of reading. And so it showed like, it was kind of the equivalent to Rocky training. So it wasn't that she just like naturally had this, magical gift of, I think a lot of people do think that. They think some people are just like talented in specific ways, but maybe they are. Maybe that's that's part of it. I mean, her mother was, we find out that her mother actually has a PhD in mathematics, I believe, but she's mentally ill, but so she has that going for her, but she also does have this like obsession and this very like disciplined way that she was introduced to the domain of chess through that guy. I like the way he very methodically introduced, she kind of learned the basic stuff on her own, and then he sat her down when he eventually agreed to work with her, then just showed her like one thing at a time, and then she built on that. And I liked that it was a display of like incremental learning, but time intensive too. And she was up, I imagine like hours. She was up hours at night looking at the ceiling, imagining different plays.
Well, we know she read that one book over and over again for presumably 8, for like, because they take chess away from her when she's 10 and she doesn't play again until she's 15 or 16. So I imagine she's literally just studying.
Right. She has the basics at that point, so she can. So
she's got 6 years of just reading chess theory.
Right.
And it's implied that and it's implied that she does nothing but this.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think just like that, showing that and how much work it is, I think that is really helpful to people that don't feel like chess isn't for them, like a lot of girls or maybe minority people who, because traditionally it's like white men who are like succeed in chess. But yeah, I can foresee like in the future there will be a lot of interest by young women in chess, and I think that, I mean, I know people were talking about how even like right now there's very few women who are in the top spots in chess, but I predict in like 10 years that'll be different.
Just because of the show, or you think just because I'm saying this aspirationally as much as more so than as a fact, but do you think it's because of the show, or do you think it's because we're doing better about not treating girls like they're stupid?
Oh, probably both.
I think it's a little column A, a little column B. I mean, I think one of the interesting things to note, and I think this is like, the show is really great and hits a lot of cultural touchstones. I think it was also coming, like, the fact that it is about chess. I mean, there has been this huge spike in interest in chess since the show, but that's actually already been building, largely because of quarantine. It's true of most games, but especially analog games where you can play against other people. They've all been trending. Chess more so than some of the other ones. So like, yeah, and I would imagine, I don't know, I could be wrong, but like I could see like this show being an occasion for a lot of like, especially like maybe older relatives who, like in my life, it's usually older relatives who teach people how to play chess, because that's, I don't know, that's my family.
My 10-year-old niece is a massive chess fan.
Chess nerd. But I imagine it being a thing where like maybe, young like kids are expressing interest in chess, and they're like, random older relative that they're stuck in their house with right now is like, let me teach you the ways.
Yeah, which is actually interesting about that you bring up teaching, because I think that's one of the things I'm very fascinated about with this show is just how this idea of genius, idea of talent actually maps so perfectly onto our own cultural assumptions about what success means and how one achieves success in American society. And I think in that sense, to me, and perhaps those are some of the aspects that I was more critical of, I think there is a tendency of us to be drawn to these notions of genius. And even as, I'm listening to us talk, there's this idea of like, oh, she worked hard, she studied and she read the books, and she was just so rigorous about sharpening her talent, her kind of natural gift, which I think is valid. I also think there's something to be said about that. Beth does not succeed by herself. She does not win.
Yes.
She does not win, in whatever competitions are happening throughout the series or the final one on her own, right? And I think that's where her character gets rather compelling and also complicated, because she's so self-centered, so obsessed, with this idea of success, idea of overcoming. And I think we are attracted to that notion of success, such that people, her friends, Jolene, her childhood friend, Mr. Scheibel, if I'm pronouncing his last name correctly, who that's right. Sends her the check. They're all kind of in the background where we don't even really talk about them or think about, or at least for what I've read, we don't really talk about how, her genius is made possible by all these people around her supporting her for her journey, like propping her up for success. But our culture is so, I think, just consumed by this idea of individuality, creativity, that, genius is made, you make yourself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's interesting.
No, I think that's really interesting. And I think like through that lens, in a weird way, I think a lot of like her breakdown through the show and kind of like her ultimate sort of like victory in the end is through a lens of figuring out that actually like the more she's obsessed with this individualist kind of way of living and like this individualist way of cultivating her genius, if we want to call it that, like it's basically eating her alive.
Yeah.
Because she spends most of the story, like because of her traumatic past, because of things that are going on in her current life, because of the amount of relatives, both adopted and otherwise, that pass away. She spends most of her adult life like basically shoving people away, even as they're trying to help her, either with chess or with like her personal issues. And it's only in the end that like we were talking about, she wins because like she's basically told like, oh, the Russians always win because they work as a team. And it's only when she starts accepting help. And I think a lot of that comes with recognizing and kind of reckoning with the ways that she's treated people kind of like garbage through her life.
And she witnessed I couldn't understand the scene where the Russians had their hotel door open. That scene bothered me. Like they had the door open to the entire
Yeah, I feel like they would not have been that.
No,
like, that
they're
was
very smart people.
Yeah,
was like a little bit of a plot hole.
they needed the movie to happen. Yes.
Yeah, but I mean, she learned from that too.
Yeah.
I mean, she learned from the other culture.
And that's kind of, I mean, I want to build off of what Anastasia just said and sort of towards some of the stuff that you talk about in your research stuff. One of the things that that you were just talking about was the rugged individualism, which is sort of in my research, I often talk about the American monomyth. And we have the mythic American hero is just someone who pulls themselves up by their own bootstraps, does everything themselves. And, I am a self-made man, and I grunt and I overcome all adversity. And we celebrate that even in something like Rocky. We celebrate that even though Rocky is not on his own. Like even in that first movie, Rocky has Paulie and Adrian. Like he's got a team that puts him together, right? But we look at it like he's the sole hero. He's the force. And I think with Beth, we end up with a character who she thinks of herself that way, even though she doesn't get there by herself. She has Scheibel, she has her adoptive mother. And then eventually there's a point where when she first starts dating Beltic, and he says, I want to coach you. What I thought was amazing about that was Harry says, I want to coach you. And he says, I admit you're better than me. Like he's like, you are a better player.
Yes.
He fundamentally says, you are a better player than me. You kicked my ass 4 years ago.
That was pro-feminist. That was very awesome.
But he also says, but he also says, but there are flaws in your game that just like you play entirely based on instinct. And here are problems you could have lost if someone had figured this out. Right. And then then later, Benny tells her the same thing. And then you see her spiraling out of control with her drug abuse and just her inability to sort of get through the trauma of losing a second mother and, like all these problems. And the show very much highlights the flaw in the idea of rugged individualism. Like it's just sort of because she's not that. She tries to be that. She is the hero. She's our protagonist, but she has this support system. Like ultimately she wins at the end. Katya, you just pointed out. Ultimately she wins at the end because of, the coalition of ex-boyfriends coalescing around her and like overcoming Vinny and Harry are basically like, you broke our hearts, but we're beating the fucking Russians. Which
I actually really kind of love, actually.
Yeah.
Like,
and it was just like we're gonna help you
we should
because
talk
we
about
need you
a
to.
bit, but
Yeah.
I mean, I think like a lot of it is that the rugged individualism part is she has this innate talent, but throughout the show she relies on other people to cultivate that talent. Like you're talking about Harry. Like part of the reason is it's like the way the show presents it. Like Harry and all of her various like male consorts. Most of them had some talent, but most of them had to train themselves to be good in a way that at least initially she doesn't have to because she's innately, she walks into a chess tournament as a high school student and beats the pants off of everybody yes, she studied to that point, but she doesn't, but a lot of that is even from the mentorship of Scheibel.
Which broke my heart, to be honest. The fact that it broke my heart that, I mean, I guess part of me wants to be empathetic with Beth, right? But it broke my heart, that scene where she walks back after Mr. Scheibel passes away. And, at this point, I'm just sobbing as I'm watching this series, right, where Mr. Scheibel kind of collects all of these newspaper clips or,
yeah, I cried too.
headlines, etc., right? And so, there's just something so powerful, so emotional about the fact that, even Jolene, when she comes back into her life, she talks about following her. We have been out of touch, so to say, but I have been watching your every move. And all of these people are watching her, right? And I think it's tragic, right? And I guess this tragedy is very human in a way that, as Katya mentioned, I think Beth is unable to kind of experience intimacy or have these really close encounters with people, right? And Mr. Scheibel, the teacher, is sort of kind of left completely out of this narrative of success. And so so I think it just kind of develops more of these touchstones throughout the narrative that kind of bring back this idea that her success is a labor of love of other people.
Yeah.
What really drove that home for me, Scheibel was touching, especially when he dies, right?
Yes.
But and Jolene is touching, and they follow her because, though not blood related, that's a surrogate father and a surrogate sister. They think of her like family. Yep. They love her. Where that was really driven home for me was she's strung out of her mind, and she goes back to her hometown chess tournament as a guest of honor. And she doesn't even remember, but there's the girl that she beat for her very first match. And and the girl who gave her tampon or whatever. And Beth doesn't remember her at all. But for this woman, now woman, 7 years later or whatever, she's insanely proud. She's like, yeah, I don't really play anymore, but I've been following your career because I just always tell people that I'm the first person you ever professionally beat. And that really pulls together that moment of, it's not just Beth on her own. This woman is just massively proud that she can be a part of the story. And I don't even remember the character's name because it doesn't matter, right? She's just I am somebody who got beat by Beth Harmon.
I mean, maybe that's one of the reasons that she was able to eventually overcome her traumas, just like this knowledge that all of these people in the background were rooting for her. I don't know if that's psychologically valid or not.
And if I am to I guess think about it, the other side of it, right? I think there's some, on one side, I guess we have this feminist genius who overcomes the underdog, right? She's brilliant, she's fierce, she's passionate. And on the other hand, we have this dynamic. And, I think someone mentioned class and race early on in this conversation, right? So if Mr. Scheibel is a working class person who is just kind of in the basement, very figuratively or symbolically, in this narrative, right? Who's in the basement, who's kind of a loner, and he props her up, he gives her perhaps not the talent or necessarily training because she's so gifted right away. But he gives her the opportunity. He connects her to the right person. He makes sure she's able to enter this first competition. There's something to me there about class that is lurking underneath, and in Beth's ascension towards success and him remaining in the basement. I think that's very symbolic, right? And then of course Jolene, as her quote unquote black friend, who also facilitates her success by donating her savings for law school, I believe, to go, for her to go to Moscow. And so I think there is something to be said about genius and whiteness, and in the way that, whiteness is individualistic, and white genius is individualistic and not communal. And so perhaps this is me reading, my own intellectual interest into this, but I think there's something to be said about, this dynamic around class and race.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of the scene. I think they're playing squash. And they're kind of sitting on the...
They're trying to.
They're trying to. Okay. They're sitting on the gym floor, and it's at one point, Beth, when Jolene offers the money, Beth refers to her as a guardian angel, and Jolene is, I think, appropriately pissed off.
Yeah.
And is like, no, I'm giving you the money because you're family. I mean, I think importantly, Jolene, even though Beth at certain points asks other people for financial support to go to Russia or for other things, it comes from Jolene and Scheibel. When it comes to money that's getting her to the next game, basically, those are the two sort of familial figures that it comes from. It's if I'm remembering correctly, I don't think it's ever any of her current or ex-boyfriend kind of figures.
No.
And then Jolene kind of like goes into this.
None of the boyfriends actually give her money. They do all offer emotional support, which is sometimes stomped on. But the money the money that she doesn't earn the 2 times that it matters comes from Jolene and from Scheibel.
And they're the ones that are removing like the necessary roadblocks to go to the next thing. Like while other people are providing like help with cultivating her skills, they're like, oh, you actually, in order for those skills to mean anything, you need concrete financial support. Let me give you that thing. And I think up until that point, because Jolene and Scheibel have been largely absent figures, like they show up in her childhood, but then after that, they kind of fade into the background. They do become these kind of amorphous guardian angel figures. And I think that scene, I don't know if it quite fully does it just because of how short the series is, but it does kind of like try and recuperate, like, no, these are actual people. And especially like the things they've been following you and they care about you and they love you. And you, human being who has never looked back for a variety of reasons, kind of rejected them, but they're still here for you.
Mm-hmm. Right. But I think also that gets also complicated and problematic around like Jolene. And I wouldn't be the first person to say where in that particular scene as a Black woman, Jolene becomes kind of modern day Mammy, right? Where, you know, I mean, I think it's so, I personally as a viewer was so angered by this idea that, you know, as a Black woman living, I guess in the 60s, Jolene would, you know, donate essentially all her savings, you know, for law school to prop up Beth after she kind of out of principle rejects the money, right? And, you know, perhaps that act of rejecting money from that church group serves as Beth's own kind of principled rebellion against, you know, being told what to do or kind of making it is her moment of making decisions for herself. Yet at the same time, you know, Jolene comes back and sort of rescues her, right, from the consequence of her decisions, right, which is again that, you know, she makes that principled choice, but she's left with nothing. And then Jolene comes in, and she's, as a Black woman, you know, she's nurturing. She's very supportive. Again, there's this language of family, which I think, you know, would have been perhaps a more meaningful scene for me had Jolene's character been developed throughout the series from the beginning to the end. But like we see Jolene's, I mean, I wouldn't even say that it's evolution of her character, right? Like in the beginning, she's, in my view,
she just manifests.
She's just like, she's a rebellious, very stereotypical, sassy, rebellious Black girl, you know, and then, you know, who becomes this white orphan's, you know, best friend. And then in the end, she comes back in again, you know, rescuing her. And so, you know, I think that's that part of the show where I felt kind of had most complicated feelings about.
I have such complicated feelings on this. So I'm going to link an article in the show notes by Gloria Oladipo called The Miss Magical Negro Trope in the Queen's Gambit. I'm not as against it as the article is, but I do think it's complicated because, so for those who don't know, magical Negro concept, it's a trope that occurs in literature wherein problems become magically solved by a wise Black overseer who's more guardian angel than character. And and it happens in a lot of stuff. It's common enough that it becomes a trope in literature. And Oladipo sort of accuses the Jolene character of doing this, right? I think it's a little more complicated than that because I think the character of Jolene on the page or on screen, like specifically tries to remove that element for herself. She, by saying, I am not a guardian angel. I am your sister. And I'm giving you this because I love you. And if I had problems, you would do the same for me. I hope, you know, like that was fine. And I think that does something. I think it does resist that nature a little bit. I also think that it does a good job of saying this is 1965 through, I think it ends in like 70 or 71 or something like that. Like, like that entire time period, like having them be, you know, this is the most racially and sexually diverse cast that one could hope for that to be and still be anywhere near accurate to that cultural moment. So I understand that issue as well. On the other hand, it is still there. So the criticism is still valid, right? Because Jolene really does step in and solve the problem, as does Towns, her gay friend, who has been largely absent from the narrative for 5 fucking episodes at this point. Like they both, like, Jolene hasn't been around for a long period. Towns has not been around for a long period. And they both just kind of come to the rescue to help the white girl. And it is a problem, but I don't think it's an insurmountable problem. I don't think it's a problem that it's a problem. Well, I think we have to be aware of it.
The ending is rushed. Like, I understand it's a limited series, but I mean, released on Netflix, they can decide how long their seasons are.
Yes,
but
it needed another episode or two.
I think that from the first episode up through her defeat at Paris, the character development, the overall story arc is much more complex and has a lot more nuance. And then once we kind of hit her like spiral into, whatever she's dealing with, I think a lot of that gets lost. And especially because it's those characters that are sort of coming to rescue her from herself at that point, we don't really see that development in the same way. Like, I would have liked there to have been equal time spent on kind of like, what does Jolene's relationship with Beth actually look like at this point? I mean, like, kind of, they just didn't take their time, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think that they did, like, when Jolene came on the scene, there was this like quick, like, what's the word, when you basically she told like her story very quickly about how she was doing really well and how she had like this guy who was exposition. Thank you. She was doing really well, and this white guy working at the firm was giving her all this money and the car and everything. And I don't know if that alleviates the problem. I guess maybe I don't completely understand the black savior thing, but to me, I guess I wasn't worried about her because she did make it clear that she was doing well. I had no doubt in my mind that she was going to do well in her career, and that giving her this money wasn't going to hurt her.
Well, the issue becomes
with Jolene though, is we see that exposition dump as if she had no actual struggles. Which historically speaking,
I believe that. I believe she struggled. I believe she struggled and overcame it.
We don't see her talk about it.
Yeah. Right. I believe she struggled, overcame it,
like,
rose to the top, and doesn't matter. Like, she has this wonderful struggle of 1960s, and we're just going to ignore that because the important thing is, how do we get this girl? How do we get the protagonist to Russia? Her black friend doesn't matter that much.
Was she supposed to be in her final year of law school? Was that her?
No, she had not yet gone to law school. She was saving for law school. She was a paralegal.
Okay, maybe.
I wish that there had been more done with the parallels there, because it's like you've seen both. It's basically 2 women who have tried to deal with their trauma and their circumstances, which are, coming from different backgrounds, but like they end up in the same orphanage. They have similar backgrounds to an extent, both dealing with different challenges. I really wish there would have been more development of like, this is what Jolene like went through, because that's what makes her able to help.
Yeah, that's true.
Too. Like, she is the older sister, and it's like, but we don't really see her struggles at all.
Yeah, what's her support
it's just
system?
Sort of like, she just manifests as like, oh, I'm a paralegal going to law school, and also like, I'm the mistress of a wealthy white dude who gives me money.
And she didn't really, like, at her school, she didn't have like someone like Mr. Scheibel, or that we knew of, at least. She just, we didn't see any support structure for her, and she was left there even after Beth was adopted. So that really needed to be filled in.
Jolene's life is only important in as much as it touches Beth's life.
Yes.
And she's arguably, like, based off of where we see her end up, Jolene's probably more of the self-made woman, which is why she's able to kind of like kick Beth into shape.
Yeah, she was always so strong.
I think we can both appreciate, the show for what it is, and also, feel strongly about this, right? Because I think there's always, this kind of but coming that I see, or I often anticipate that, this is 1964 or 1968 or whatever. Obviously racial segregation was there and all of these things, right? But, Black women were full, complex, beautiful, complicated people in 1964 as they are in 2020, right? So to me, I think that, as much as I appreciate this show, I think that's something that should be, condemned in the strongest terms, because as I was preparing, for our conversation, I just glanced over the Queen's Gambit Wikipedia page, right? And it says that they're a former, world chess champion Kasparov and chess coach Bruce Pandolfini acted as consultant for the show, right? I mean, this is 2020. If you can hire a former world chess champion, you can hire a Black studies professional to advise on the show, and talk about how to represent Black women on the screen as complex, beautiful beings, just as, Beth, or the actress Anya, who are, both flawed and brilliant and, self-centered and beautiful and, complicated, right? And I think we just have to call it like it is. Beth is a character and Jolene is a trope. And I think that is what we see on the screen in white produced TV shows and films where Black women become these crutches for white women, right? And it's decades, centuries old trope in this, in this sense. And I think Jolene, even though she kind of emphasized, I'm not your guardian English, I'm your family, that family language maps neatly on the figure of the mammy in the terms of, within the dynamics of plantation slavery, where, certain enslaved people were taken into, quote unquote, the master's house. And, because of their obedience, right? Like we can, trace the whole genealogy of that through, films like Gone with the Wind, right? So I do think that, as people thinking about culture, there's a certain responsibility and like calling out that in the harshest ways possible, because I think frankly, in 2020, Netflix could do better and should do better.
Yeah, there should be a season 2 all about Jolene.
There easily could be, and that was the problem. They Katya, you even said, yes, it's a limited series, but it's a limited series because Netflix decided it wanted it to be a limited series, right? It could have been 14 episodes. Like all the Marvel shows had 13 episodes. There's no reason why they had to stop at 7. It could have once they split, you could parallel their lives if you wanted to. The show producers decided they were interested in one story over the other, and that's.
I suspect a lot of that had to do with the material that was presented in the original book, because at least I haven't read the book, but at least like reading some of the summaries and reading some of the articles of people who read the book before the series came out, like Jolene's character and Scheibel's character, they're explored more than they are in the show, but it seems like not to a substantially greater extent.
But that criticism can be levied at the book as well, right? Like,
sure, absolutely.
I've not read, but
and also like the show deviates. I mean, like one of the criticisms from a lot of people who've read the book is that the show deviates quite a bit from a lot of other like major plot points and characteristics of the book. So it's like there's no reason why you're beholden to this other than you can't be bothered as a writer or producer.
I do want to make it clear that it's not just the race issue that I had this problem with. I mean, I feel like they're trying. I feel like the try is not necessarily successful because I think the "but we're family" speech helps, but it's not enough. I agree with Anastasia. I think that they don't even try hard enough with Towns, and he's probably And Steph knows this because we've talked about it. Towns is the character that I am most, I'm going to say, annoyed with in the entire series of main characters, and it's for a weird reason, because he suffers from much the same problem. He's the magical gay, right? In the same way that Jolene is the magical Negro. I am okay with a woman being hung up on her first love. I'm okay with her first love being a gay guy, and that's why it never worked out. I am not okay with Towns being Beth's first love, because I don't know why she loves him, other than the fact that, like, I know she had a crush on him when she first met him. I'm fine with that. She was like 15, 14, whatever. Sometimes you have a crush on an older boy. I get that. And she sees him again, a few years later, thinks she's going to hook up with him, finds out that he has I guess a boyfriend. It's not because he really does seem
the
like
part that bothered me.
Yeah, it seems like he's flirting with her. So
yes,
I presumed he was bisexual and was going to hook up with her,
or straight.
And I saw the boyfriend. I got that the other guy was his boyfriend. So like, yeah. So I thought that he was bi and was going to hook up with her, and then he doesn't. I guess because he's gay, and then he doesn't see her again for years. and she mentions him briefly when she's with the French girl whose name I forget right now. But she's like, I can't be in love with Benny because I'm in love with one boy and his name is Towns. And I'm like, you are? I had no idea because I wasn't given enough of him. And I'm okay with her being in love with him.
It came out of nowhere.
Why?
Also, like, her emotional attachments to literally every character like that. Like, it's a little bit clearer with her adopted mother, like, why? Because they have some things in common. Like, that relationship has developed a little bit more. But other than that, like, I think part of it is they rushed a lot of aspects of the show having to do with the like development of characters that aren't Beth.
Mm-hmm.
And the other aspect of it is the way that they've written Beth's character. I'm not sure that she actually cares about other people.
I thought she was sort of Asperger.
There's certainly some neuroatypical, plus her drug problem, like about her. But like you were going to say stuff about like the relationship.
Oh yeah, with Towns, I can see her falling for him because when she first met him, he was the one who kind of was protective. Is my memory? Am I right about that? He seemed like very protective of her and helped her through the first tournament that she was in. So I can see her developing warm feelings towards him.
And he's cute.
As a result, yeah, he's definitely cute.
He's attractive,
and he's
dude.
the first guy that pays attention to her and doesn't immediately dismiss her off the bat.
Right. Yeah. So I get it, but she doesn't see him for what I imagine. I mean, I didn't go and and they give us date stamps on the episode. I didn't count, but I think it's like a 5-year gap.
Okay, so like I can explain this as her being obsessive with like her Asperger's. She is Asperger's-ish. Then she is like very obsessed about very specific things, like a few specific things. Chess being one, maybe Towns being another that she thinks about, and and he is in her mind associated with chess in a positive way.
Never mentions him again though. Like,
but I mean, it can make sense. I'm saying it should have said something.
I just needed something else, anything else, other than to know that, like when she mentions
this is in retrospect.
Towns to Cleo, that's the first time she's said his name in like 3 episodes. And if she's obsessed with, if she's obsessed with him, just any hint of that, like I get that she doesn't form attachments very well. But when she's like starts dating Beltic because he's there, it's like, oh yeah, you're gonna help me with my chess game. We're hanging out. I guess we might as well fuck. Sure. All right. And he's like, well, do you want me to stay here? You can, or you can leave. I don't care. I'm okay with that being her. I'm okay with her developing feelings for Benny that she can't handle over their aloofness, right? But when Cleo asks, are you in love with Benny? And she says, I'm not, because there's one boy and it's Towns. And I'm just like, who? That guy?
I guess like that didn't.
Yeah, it was weird to me because I just needed something else.
Maybe because I watched this entire series in like 2 days, that didn't bother me as much because like there is this scene when they think they're gonna hook up, like, and she has this weird like fantasizing moment like afterwards when she's in the hotel room with her mother. Yeah. Like I guess from that I'm like sort of like, okay, this is the thing she thinks about regularly. Like it's not the strongest narrative connection. I'd agree with that, but I'm like, okay, I buy this especially because like I think.
Wait, did she confess that to the French model before or after she saw him again and she went to his hotel room and then saw his boyfriend there?
Well after.
After.
She doesn't even meet Cleo till
years afterwards.
Yeah.
It's
okay.
Years later.
Yeah,
that makes a little more sense then.
It's the night before her match with French. Yeah, I mean, given that it's only seven episodes, that was enough for me, especially because, like, to be perfectly honest, like, it's not her relationships with people are not what I find, like her romantic relationships are not ones I find particularly interesting in the show, which is, I think, in part a weakness of the sort of like end game, for lack of a better term, of the show, because I think like when Towns reappears, it's a little like, well, okay, like a little Deus Ex Machina kind of like whatever. Yeah. And then even like all of like the ex-boyfriends pitching at the end, which I really liked, actually, like that sort of like the phone call. I thought that was, I enjoyed that aspect of the plot a lot, but even then it was just sort of like the entire thing with Russia just felt rushed. That entire
yeah, it did.
I agree.
I think that was part of it. Like Towns.
Well, hold on, because I think you don't skip over because I think the reason the ex-boyfriend thing worked, whereas Russia was rushed, Towns was rushed. The ex-boyfriend, specifically Harry and Benny, worked because I know who the fuck these people are. Yeah. Like I've had time to get to meet Harry and Benny and know how they're different, know why they have problems with her, know why they've forgiven her, and know why they care about her. Like, and even with Jolene, I mean, it was years ago, but I had 2 whole episodes of them as children.
They were together for years.
I know why they care about each other. And that's why those worked for me.
I just want to say, I wonder if we can think about Towns, in the context of her trauma as a kind of fantasy, right? I think there's something about, we began talking about escapism. And I wonder if Towns represents for Beth a kind of escapist fantasy. I agree that I also was a little confused. And I remember watching with my partner and I was, kind of like, why does she even like this guy? It doesn't seem like they established any kind of,
he's pretty.
Any kind of bond
he's very pretty.
In a way that, what's his name? In a way that the person, Beltic, the guy who comes to her and try to help her, right? Or Benny, right? And, it seems like she is sort of not even seeing that goodness, right? The good guys that are, in the case of Beltic, I read him as the guy who was, genuine and caring for her, right? And so she doesn't seem to be able to receive that. And she's kind of caught up in this fantasy of her own mind about this love that, she developed with this person that, we didn't really see develop in any meaningful ways. And so I'm wondering if, even if perhaps not well executed in terms of narrative or plot structure, if that kind of symbolizes some sort of escapism for her, and whether when she meets him in Moscow, where she's able to kind of accept, his explanation, become friends with him, whether that kind of marks, Beth's own coming into maturity. And I'm also particularly interested to hear y'all's thoughts about the resolution of the series, kind of the last scene where she, rejects the invitation to go to the White House to meet the president and turns around and goes into this small park with elderly, men who are playing chess and kind of, goes there. So to me, Towns ties into this whole narrative of her coming into herself, coming into her maturity. And so I wonder if that speaks to y'all as well.
I think with Towns, a large part of it, maybe the biggest part of it, is just because he happened to be the first one to step in, and he was obviously very cute, and he stepped in and helped her, with her first tournament. And I think she probably thought about him a lot, and so that kind of, just with your first,
If I'd even seen it once, maybe. I agree with you. That's what it's probably supposed to say.
Yeah, there could have been more.
It seemed weird to me because,
but it's possible though.
I think you
obsessive personality. You can do that.
Yeah, I just wish I didn't have to fill in that gap. I think you're probably right. I think Stephanie's explanation is exactly what I'm supposed to feel. I just
you don't
because
feel
I'm just like, where
you're not a young woman in love.
Not anymore. I mean, it's not that there haven't been people in my life that I've been hung up on, right? But it's still, this is not a life. This is a story on television. Give me that narrative dot.
Maybe it's the editor's fault.
Right. And I just needed a little something more. Because here was my problem with it. And because we started to talk about it, and I don't want to, Steph, you started to mention it, and Katya started to mention it too. The relationship with Cleo, right? I am perfectly okay with Beth's relationship with Cleo as it is, because Cleo's not important. Cleo is somebody who is fun. She's pretty. And I can drink with her. We can have sex, and that can be over with, right? Cleo's not important.
She's my second least favorite character on the show.
No, and I think you're going to say, I actually want you to say why, but I'm saying as a plot device, Cleo is not important to Beth, other than the fact that she is a good time in the 2 scenes when she's around, and she almost ruins her life, right?
Yes, that's why.
I get that, right?
Just seemed very selfish.
It was.
Just wait until she wins, and then do what you need to do.
But my problem is the narrative gives Cleo as much reason to exist and be a part of Beth's life as Towns. So I need to feel like he's more important for reasons other than because Towns is the one who happens to help at the end, whereas Cleo never shows back up. Towns ends up being a good guy. Cleo ends up being a bad girl. But
it could be, but she says it's not till after the hotel incident where she says that Towns was her one true love. So maybe part of it also, in addition to him being like the first.
After which hotel? It's before they sleep together.
Oh.
She tells her Towns was her true love.
No, after Towns, after she sees
they're sitting in the bar together.
Yes.
So yes, I was thinking another reason why she might think of him as her first love, in addition to, or as her love, in addition to being the first one, is that he was like, she realized somehow, and when this could be like a side discussion, that he was unattainable when she went with him to his hotel and he was taking photos of her in a very kind of like, to me, seemed very romantic way. And I would kind of fall in love with him if I were her too. So I can see that happening. And then somehow she did make the connection that the guy in the hotel room wearing the nice short shorts was actually his boyfriend. And so she realized that, oh, this guy is, he's actually gay and he's unattainable. So I can see her yearning for that when her whole life has been like loss and has been loss of people. And that's like the core of her trauma has been the car accident where her mother was killed. So that can be like another psychological component and reason for her to sort of yearn for Towns that she didn't have like associated with anyone else who's very accepting. Like, for instance, the guy with the duster.
Benny,
yes. He was like always there for her and she didn't have that same kind of like yearning for like going after feelings. So it kind of makes sense maybe in that way.
Also, okay, so this is a question for Stephanie and the thought is not fully formulated, so apologies. But like when Beth runs into Towns for the second time, there is that sort of realization of like, oh, I'm into this guy, but it's not going to work out for some fairly apparent reasons. And we don't really hear about him again until Cleo kind of like prompts her. And the way at least I read that scene initially, and I'd have to go back and look at it to see if it still like feels that way, is that she might still have these like this crush, these latent feelings, but like I wonder if there's something to do maybe with like her mental state and the obsessiveness that somehow in the act of prompting and maybe realizing she doesn't really have anybody else, she's just like that one. Does that make sense? Okay. Like, is there something about this? Like, because we were talking earlier about like the obsessive tendencies.
Yeah.
It would be embarrassing, and also just like I wonder if there's something to do with the obsessive tendencies that like, because I think there is, even though Cleo is a plot device to a large extent, like she is also like the first woman we really see in Beth's adult life that she like admires. Like she admires the fact that she's a model. She's envious of the clothing and like, especially being, I mean, they're both very feminine people, but I think like Beth admires like Cleo's particular brand of femininity and particular sexuality.
The free spiritness of her. Yeah, Cleo is very upfront about everything. She says what she means. Like, I understand why Stephanie doesn't like her because it's
just that one action.
Right.
Other than that, she's
Cleo
good.
to that point, and that's the part that makes Cleo feel like a plot device. Because I'm like, it even didn't really feel like in character. Like Cleo doesn't initially come across as a character that's out to screw people.
Right. Or
She's
even
weird.
thoughtless. Yeah.
Well, yeah, because she's not. Like, I don't think Cleo's thoughtless up until that point. Cleo is.
She respects
bohemian.
Intelligence.
Yes.
Yeah, she has like this like kind of
she says, I don't even know the rules
fetish
of chess,
for intelligence.
Yeah, I don't know the rules of chess, but I love that they're good at it. Is what she says about all the boys, that she's she's good
because she has the prettiness and she wants the intelligence part too to be whole or
Benny's
something.
former lover. She's poly and dating the two other guys whose names they're indistinguishable and their names don't matter, right? But she's dating the two other guys and she's free spirited and she calls Beth because she clearly wants, from the very first meeting, she clearly wants to sleep with Beth, and I'm fine with all that. I'm fine with Beth exploring her sexuality with her. It did seem it
was a plot device.
It comes across as selfish. Of no, you need to come be with me now. I don't care that the most important day of your life is tomorrow. I'm in the hotel lobby right now. It does seem selfish, and I understand why that's off-putting. And it might be more forgivable if Cleo had more character, but she's only in those two scenes, right? So,
and she made it seem like she didn't know when she was leaving Paris.
Well, she didn't. I believe that. I believe that about her bohemianness, right? But you need more. And that's why I said, like, she's exactly the same as Towns in that it's just these two little interactions that you have with this person. And with Towns, it turns out better because he does the right thing at the end, whereas Cleo essentially fucks her over.
So it's interesting, while y'all were talking, I looked up Cleo because I kind of forgot how she looked like. And, just like to put the image to the name, And it's very interesting. And I wonder what y'all think, given this conversation. So there's apparently a fan theory that says that Cleo was a spy sent by the Russians. And so
that's interesting.
And so a part of me feels a little, I was just like, oh, that's an interesting, and while you were talking, I was kind of skimming this article that I saw when looking up her photo. And, so it's basically kind of speculating that Cleo appears once Beth has sobered up and, is more kind of in a better state, right, to kind of sabotage her before her big tournament with Borgakov. I think I'm messing up the name of the chess player. But yeah, so that was very interesting as I was listening to y'all talk about, kind of her motive and like, why would she do that? And also kind of conflicted because one of the things I've also been thinking about is kind of the portrayal of the USSR and Russians in this particular series. And so I grew up in a Russian family in Eastern Europe. So a lot of my own genealogy is from USSR, Soviet Russia. And so I was, I thought that the TV show did a better job than most American film about that, and not to deflect from the discussion of Cleo, but I just thought it was very interesting that fans are now speculating that she's a Russian spy.
I think
she was the best spy ever if she was a spy.
Well, and that's another thing of like, I mean, when I'm thinking back, and again, I have to watch it again, I think that's an interesting theory, and I don't think it's baseless. I mean, there is...
We'll link to an article in the show notes. There's an article in the Insider from Kim Renfro that we will link to in the show notes about that. But Katya, continue, please. Because
I'm just like, when I'm thinking back and like, I don't know, that was not something that initially occurred to me on the first watch through, but I was crying through most of the show, so that might be why. Also, I was freaking out over all of the dresses and be like, ooh, which one can I make? So I was distracted. Also, I want most of Cleo's clothes too. So anyway, but like, because I could see like, because there's a difference between Paris and Russian matches is like she's literally instructed not to drink because Russian spies in the second one by the U.S. government. So I could see that being a reason. I don't think the show does a good. I mean, as we've kind of talked about, like the show doesn't always do a good job of explaining things.
No.
I don't know how much. Like, I think that is a definite plot hole of like why Cleo does what she does. I initially on the first watch through assumed it was because there was like some kind of jealousy there, or like because because she's upset that Benny is no longer in love with her. Like when that original conversation, there's like
that's more plausible.
There's a conversation that they have briefly where like Cleo looks longingly at Benny of like, oh, he isn't in love with me, and I think like I might be reading into the conversation, but she implies it's because she's not smart.
See, I read it exactly the opposite way, and here's where. So she's
trying to get back at Benny through Beth. I mean, I think that there are myriad possibilities that could explain it, but the show doesn't do the work to explain it.
And here's where it's empty, because I think I'm going to be curious about Stephanie and Anastasia's views of this too, because I feel the exact same way as Katya in that I don't think that Cleo's a spy, but I also don't think Cleo really wants Benny back. I don't think she was trying to prove a point. I 100% believe her when she says, no, me and Benny is in the past. It's fine. You do what you do. Because I think she's smart enough. I think Cleo's smart enough to know that Beth is not in love with Benny. She says, Benny can only love himself. That's fine.
Right.
I think Cleo accepts that. I think Cleo is just so free spirited. So,
and see, that's my read on what actually happens. Is she just doesn't. I don't think she's trying to screw Beth over. Like, I think that's a possible reading of the show, but I think it's just literally like, this is what she does all the time.
Yes.
And like the fact that Beth has a giant chess match the next day, probably doesn't really occur to her.
I think she likes Beth a lot. I think she sincerely enjoys hanging out with her. She's sincerely attracted to her, and she's like, let's go get drunk and have sex. And the fact that the ramifications of what happens 6 hours after that are completely foreign to Cleo in my mind.
She's very
and it's just the impulsiveness.
And again, her character is not super developed, so we don't know this. But like my impression of her character is like that is a situation that Cleo has never experienced. Like she has never experienced like, holy shit, a world life changing day is tomorrow. Because she kind of talks about like, oh, I'm just a model
Like we just kind of like, I just kind of like float through things.
Right. And I think, and I believe that. I absolutely believe it.
Yeah.
So I'm curious as to what you two think, Stephanie and Anastasia.
Yeah, I agree. It's completely unplanned, and it's just her like giving in to her like desires at the time. Yes, I see that, but it still makes me mad.
The KGB thing is interesting.
Yeah.
Interestingly for me, I think that scene when they're, I think, in the lobby of a hotel or in the bar, and you know, I personally didn't have a lot of anger with Cleo, but I actually had anger at Beth. It's almost, I was just like, oh, what are you doing? You know, you have this match tomorrow, right? You know, you have this competition, like, you know, and so I think for me, as someone, I guess, who has been interested in psychology and healing and, you know, what it means to take responsibility for yourself. For me, it was a moment of like, no, Beth, this is your moment to take responsibility. And so I see Cleo, you know, we don't really know much about her. She's kind of like more of a, you know, mysterious character, I guess, in some ways. And so, you know, to me, Cleo most of all represents kind of this temptation for Beth, right? And I think in that particular moment when Cleo offers her a drink, I think, you know, and Beth tries to resist, you know, she has a choice whether she, you know, doesn't drink, knowing that she has a, you know, a drug abuse or alcohol abuse problem, and, you know, and goes and sort of prepares for her competition, or she gives into this temptation. So I think that particular scene was kind of what stood out to me the most.
Yeah, I guess to be fair to Beth, she did initially, like, they have two conversations. Like, initially, she did tell Cleo that she didn't want to meet her, that she had this.
She said, what about tomorrow?
Yeah,
and then she came down later anyway.
Yeah. Because I think, like, Cleo kind of guilted her, is my impression. So.
Well, Cleo said, well, I mean, maybe I might be in town tomorrow, I might not, but I'm going to drink here.
Yeah, I mean, it was ultimately her responsibility.
It was also very, like, set up as a, well, now or never kind of thing.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, and to be fair, I mean, not fair. It's you know, it is Beth's responsibility, but Beth is immature and a drug addict at that point.
Yep, alcoholic. Come down to the bar.
So, you know,
she hasn't had anything to drink in Russia up until that point.
Well, no, this is Paris.
Oh, sorry, Paris.
Yeah. It's so, you know, it's like I understand it. You know, she gave into temptation. It is a human moment. I believe. I don't think it needs to be so sinister as that she's a spy.
No.
Yeah, and I think I mean, and in some ways, also like it is a plot device in the sense of like it would have been a worse show if she just beats the Russians the first time she plays against them.
Yes, that's true.
Like it would have been kind of a crap TV show. Okay. There needed to be something.
Okay,
I think like it was important. And it was important for the plot that like she loses that match not because she's not good at chess, but because she allows like her crutches basically to destroy that day.
Right. Because the first time she loses to Borgov, it's because Borgov is just better. Like she loses in Mexico.
Yeah.
And then she loses again in Paris because she's high, you know. And she says she would have lost anyway. And Benny is basically like, I don't know about that, you know, like, and then, so it's part of her. I think it's part of her progression and growth, you know.
Yeah, and then
her character as an underdog, right? Like we, as an audience member, we need her to lose, right? Like, you know, I remember this moment when we were watching my partner, and I was just like, oh, it was almost like, of course she's going to lose, but she has to lose in order to fulfill this promise of genius that, you know, rises up to the challenge, that overcomes, you know, I mean, this is the kind of very dominant narrative, you know, that we can think about in terms of like the American dream, or just like the ethos of success, right? It's like you fall, you get up again. And so like in terms of the narrative, we need her to lose all those times in order to like continue cheering her on and continue wanting her to become, you know, the world champion. And interestingly for me, it's not really her final success, her final victory that was the most important, is the way that, you know, she then returns to these elderly men playing, you know, in a random neighborhood in Russia, which to me signified a kind of return to Mr. Scheibel.
Well, she starts. It's like it's the return of Mr. Scheibel, and it's also like she's playing chess for fun.
Right.
Yeah, something she hasn't done since she was a little girl.
But it always seemed like she would read the books of her own volition, which is That's something that I really admired about her.
Yeah.
It's her own volition, but it's always in pursuit of like the next goal. Like it's always in pursuit of the next title.
And also
like,
monetary.
Yes, like it's not that she kind of does have to play chess to survive at a certain at that point. Like it is how she's basically funding her life. And she, to me, I guess for most of the show, like she is invested in chess. She is fascinated by chess. Like I'm not questioning that, but she is playing chess in order to be the best. Like she is chasing that. Like as soon as she figures out what a grandmaster is at that first tournament, she's basically like, oh, I want to be that.
Right.
Like, that's the thing. And I'm not saying she doesn't enjoy chess along the way, but that like it's always instrumental to get to that thing. And then once she's there, she's done it. It's like, well, because there is that one scene with the Russian boy. It's like, well, what do you do once you become grand champion? And the boy doesn't understand her question.
Yeah.
I mean, she's also kind of asking herself that, like, what happens? And this is part of why I don't think this is a second season, because I don't know that she has anything.
Right. Well, all she can do is fall, right? Like, which is the problem with the success of Rocky movies, right? Like in Rocky, he has to just keep going through. You know, he fails the first time, he beats Apollo the second time, and now you're just getting bigger and bigger magical challenges that they just keep throwing in front of him up until they essentially reboot the series with Creed, with him being an old man who's mentoring somebody else. But you just need to just keep throwing more and more deadly people in front of her. And that becomes boring. So I don't think there's a second season either. I think the answer to the little boy's question is, look, you know, if you want to survive this, you know, you have to find something that is meaningful to you. Borgov we sort of see old Beth in Borgov, like we're and the other guy too, the other grandmaster with the
hair. He was my second favorite.
Yeah,
character.
they basically are just sort of, they have become students of the game, because Borgov's not a bad guy.
No,
you know, he's like, I'm a student of the game. I respect your youth and I respect your ability. You've earned my respect. And I think Beth has gotten to this point in that final scene. I don't think it's returning to Scheibel, but also I think it is literally, she's not playing to get better. She's not playing to become a grandmaster. No one in this park poses a threat to her at all. She's going to kick these old men's ass. But like, it's not even about, she didn't announce that she was going there. She walks down there and it's just like, I get to just sit down and enjoy a game of chess. Like something I've not done since I was 15. I get to enjoy.
Well, she's playing a game of chess possibly for the first time, not to prove herself. Because even when she's playing with Scheibel, she's playing with Scheibel to prove that she can do it.
Right. And when she's playing with Benny and Cleo's two boyfriends, like I wish I could remember their name. I'm too lazy. Too lazy to look them up, and they don't matter.
Yeah, the other guys.
She's playing 3 games at the same time, you know, of speed chess, which she's bad at. And she's like, no, we're going to play it because I need to be, you know, because after Benny kicks her ass at speed chess and he says, it's a trick. It's a different game. Don't worry about it. And she's like, no, I have to be good at this too. So I'm playing not to enjoy it. I'm playing to prove that I can learn.
Yeah, she's a learning goal.
Yeah. Yep. So I appreciate the difference there. It is sort of magical how she gets there, right? Like she just
I was about to say,
I have passed the final threshold. This is the end of my monomythic journey. So now I am Zen Master Beth Harmon.
That part she was sort of magical in translating herself. I'm not sure what the difference between slower pace. I mean, they do move rather quickly, even in the regular games. So can't be too much of a difference.
Chess?
Yeah, speed chess.
You should try playing it. It's
but especially versus a bunch of people. Yeah, it's just based on pattern recognition, I assume, even more so in speed chess.
They're like you can play online and you've got like 5 seconds per move or something like that. It's ridiculous. You're literally just like trying to.
Yeah, it's like the chess equivalent of Twitch gaming.
Yeah, it's insanity.
So part of the reason I want to talk about this show, to sort of transition into this, is because of the fashion. Regular listeners know I'm the sewing person. I do a lot of vintage sewing. The sewing world lost its collective mind when this show came out. I've already made a dress inspired by the show. There's an entire online threads of all the sewists.
Oh, you should post a picture, by the way. That would be really cool.
It's on my Instagram, which I'll plug at the end of the show.
Okay.
And the reason I want to talk about this is because when I was researching for the show, one of the complaints I saw from people who've read the book, which, as we know, the book and the show, whether one is always better than the other,
or different.
It's usually, but here's the thing. Almost always, if you've read the book before and you see the show or the movie afterwards, you think the book is better because that was the story you were first invested in.
Right,
Or
because
vice versa.
nothing can match the picture of Beth Harmon that exists in your head that you read before.
Your first
Exactly.
love.
And they're different mediums, and stories do need to suit the medium. So one of the main criticisms I was seeing repeated in a lot of places is in the book, Beth is described as sort of a plain Jane. The thing that makes her attractive is she's brilliant. In the show, Beth is obviously very stunning. And people were basically complaining that having Beth be physically attractive, and especially the interest in fashion, which as I gather was not part of the book, that was undermining the character for them.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the reason I take issue with this is one, television is a different medium than a book.
Mm-hmm.
Hollywood being what it is, and acting being what it is, you are likely to have even a quote unquote plain actress is often superhumanly attractive.
Yeah,
Charlize Theron.
yes. Charlize Theron.
Right.
Hollywood beauty is Anya Taylor-Joy is going to be attractive in this role. And yes, I get that the counter is, well, why aren't we just making movies and TV shows about less attractive people? And it's like, because
here's
people
the thing,
don't watch them.
I think had you fallen into the trope of the nerdy smart girl is unattractive, it would have been a worse show.
I agree.
And because we actually don't, and it has to do with this idea of who is a genius and who gets to be a genius. We still deride feminine women who are interested in clothes and in makeup and in fashion, as being anti-intellectual. And actually, I see that in a lot of the criticism, is that a woman, there's a lot of these critics, many of whom were women, actually, saying that you can't possibly be interested in clothes and glamour and also be a genius.
You only have so many character points to spend, Katya, so you have to choose. Do you want to be pretty or do you want to be smart?
Well, and they actually make fun of this, and the show actually kind of points this out, which I actually found that moment really interesting, is when she's in an interview, I forget which game it was for, but she's in an interview and people ask you many of your critics in the chess world basically say, how could you possibly be, you're too glamorous essentially to play chess. I think it's actually heading into her Paris match.
Yes. Or I think it's actually before that because her mom's still alive, isn't she?
Yes. And her rebuttal is basically, I forget the exact quote off the top of my head, but it's essentially I can do two things at once. I can be a complex person. I don't have to just be one thing, especially response. And I think that's actually really important. Because when we're talking about, Steph, you mentioned the top of the show of will this, change who plays chess and who eventually becomes a chess champion or whatever. And I'm I think that's an important message because so often smart women in movies and television, the message is you can't get both. You can't be stereotypically feminine. You can't be high femme in the way that Beth is, and also be smart.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I found really powerful, actually.
It's interesting because as, someone who does intellectual work and is also feminine presenting, right? I actually, that didn't even cross my mind when watching. It kind of, those, I can totally see why, kind of glamour and fashion and kind of raw intellect, which is, especially a chess game that, requires logic, which is always already coded as masculine, right? I can see how those can be clashing together for other viewers, right, who are kind of committed to a particular one-dimensional narrative of either genius or, logical genius or femininity. But I was also interested in thinking about, or at least the way in which I read it. To me, in the show, glamour, fashion was also a narrative of social mobility.
Yes,
I think in some ways, in written text, in a novel, there are certain things that you can describe in greater detail, right, to show the person's kind of class journey. I think when we think about the clothes that Beth wears in an orphanage, which are really gray, really simple, right? It's just it's just miserable, right? The whole aesthetic of the orphanage is miserable. And to me, her glamour, her kind of luxury, in terms of, her lifestyle of her appearance kind of also signaled to her kind of being uplifted from that basement of the orphanage. So that's interesting because that's how I perceived it at first.
We've talked about in previous episodes the way that fashion is important to how we often craft our own identities, and I think the show portrays that in a really interesting way because the first time she wins a chess match, the first two things she's excited to buy is a chess set and a new dress.
Because I was going to say that exact same thing. Just building exactly off of what Anastasia said. in a book, I can give you a whole chapter about Beth's or 5 chapters. Like I have unlimited space. It's just how much paper do I want to spend? I can give you all the mental deconstruction of how she's feeling about class mobility that I feel like writing. In the TV series, it is exactly keyed out in the scene that Katya just explained. She wins that first tournament and she goes and she buys a cheap chess set. It's her first one that she actually owns after all these years of playing. She owns her own set. And then she's as almost overlooking it. You see her decide, I am buying myself a new dress. This is something, and it's not talked about. It's just like, it's several episodes later where she admits that she's addicted to fashion, right? Like before then, she just gets progressively more glamorous from match to match because you never see it. You see her buy that first dress, but then when they fly, and you don't see her do it, when they fly to, I want to say Cincinnati is where the second tournament is. When her and her second mother fly to Cincinnati, she's wearing saddle shoes because she was always embarrassed by her ugly shoes from the other girls. So she's got nice shoes on. And then it's like 2 or 3 matches later when she cuts her hair for the first time. And so, yes, I understand the criticism that people might have of, well, why does successfulness mean you need to be more glamorous? It doesn't. You don't need to, but we're telling a visual story and we have escaped through several scenes of exposition of what's going on through her class mobility, just through her gradual shift in appearance. Because it's not immediate. It is gradual after every match. Because I went back and checked, she gets successively more glamorous to the point when they're in Mexico before her mom dies, she's wearing clearly designer dresses as opposed to, because that first dress that she buys, like it's that first one, it's basically
from an expensive department store. It's also the first thing she buys. It's the first piece of clothing she's ever owned that isn't secondhand.
Yes. That's exactly it. It's not, it's glamorous to her. It's glamorous to, I'm 15 years old and I bought this with my own money that I earned through my brain. That is a massively important moment to, look what I have achieved. I was literally sleeping, and the other thing is when she first moves into the house, when she first gets adopted, I get this whole room to myself. Like these moments
That's really cute.
Yeah. These moments matter to her and they sort of, so there's something about our life that I'll explain. Like Steph yells at me sometimes because because she's like, you own too many clothes. Why do you own so many clothes?
He owns twice as many clothes as I do, at least.
He probably owns more clothes than I do, and I make mine.
Yeah, and I own lots of clothes. I own lots of shoes. Why? Because I grew up really poor. I grew up extremely poor.
Did anyone make fun of you for your clothes?
Yeah, of course I did. Yes, okay. Kids are horrible.
Yeah, I thought that was really the main impetus for her.
Yeah, but of course, yeah. When I was, and I wasn't poor. I wasn't super poor my entire life, but like growing up and and I wore 3rd and 4th hand clothes in elementary school, like stuff that I inherited from my cousin who inherited them from our other cousin who inherited them from our other cousin. And when I was done, I passed them down to my brother, right? Like that's how things worked in my family. Like the only thing that you had were shoes because shoes fall apart. And those were never nice shoes or expensive shoes. So yeah, like now I can buy my own clothes. If I decide I want a nice pair of jeans or a nice suit or whatever, I go to the store and I buy it. It's great, and right. So that's meaningful in a way that now, am I Anya Taylor-Joy glamorous? No, but I understand. I'm not. I wish I was, but
hey, you could be.
I just think that's the story I associate with that. And I think even if you're not the person who, again, I went from, growing up on welfare to a PhD program, right? So like that's a long variance through being, I was a software designer for a while. So I've had a large life transition. So maybe you can't identify with exactly me, but I think telling that story visually just through little things like, oh my God, she looks stunning. That girl was in an orphanage 2 episodes ago.
I know. I don't normally appreciate clothes, but I really did for this series, I have to say.
And I think the other thing that I think to me also bridges kind of the narrative of what sounds like the book is with what's in the show is I keep thinking of so for those of you who are interested in burlesque, you will probably know who Dita Von Teese is.
Absolutely.
Oh, I know.
Possibly the most glamorous woman on the planet. Like, definitely up there. And there's an interview, I forget how long ago it was, but there's an interview where she's talking about when she's a young girl looking at pictures of like extremely glamorous women in magazines and basically saying, I could never be as glamorous as that, because that version of like completely natural beauty where you're just like naked, no makeup, blah, 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 which I mean, they are working makeup and also Photoshop exists. But anyway. She was talking about, she's like, she saw that as a young woman as a kind of beauty she could never attain. And part of the reason she was interested in vintage fashion and corsistry is she's like, that is constructed beauty. She was like, that is a kind of beauty that does not interest. And we actually talk about this on the corset show. Is like, historically, their beauty standards you could modify your body in different ways to fit beauty standards in a way that 21st beauty standards, it is more complicated relationship, which is not to say one is better than the other. They're just different. But Dita Von Teese is like, you can construct a glamorous identity through vintage fashion in a way that she didn't see in contemporary fashion. And I think part of what we see in The Queen's Gambit is also that. Like, Beth is never unattractive because, Anya
Taylor-Joy is attractive, right.
But she becomes progressively more attractive because she is crafting an identity. It's also, she's constructing it in a way that is her first real experience of agency, and chess and fashion are always tied from that moment where the two first things she buys is a chess set and a dress. Like, as she's crafting her genius, she's also crafting her aesthetic persona.
I saw them as like more intertwined. I kind of saw her fashion as like aiding her confidence, and she really wanted to be confident in chess. So that's kind of my impression, but maybe they were two independent.
No, I think you can read it either way.
I think they are intertwined. Like they're two different ways of her constructing different aspects of her, like who she is.
I think there's also something to be said. I think I agree with Katya completely around this whole like crafting of persona, crafting of oneself. But I'm also interested in thinking about why audiences might be so kind of resistant to kind of fashion and luxury, because I'm thinking about it not just as appearance, because I think she also invests in like redesigning the house and buying furniture, etc. And kind of making her, lived space beautiful. But I also think there's something around pleasure that we code as like frivolous and self-indulgent. And I wonder if there's something that is kind of in tension with narratives of success that kind of require suffering, right? And I think that as a character, Beth suffers internally, yet at the same time, as soon as her and Alma kind of Alma, her adoptive mother, set on this path of, success and one win after the other, they are very indulgent in these luxuries, right? Like hotels and dresses and martinis or, drinks. And so I also wonder if there's something about them being, subjects who are coded as feminine, like indulging in those things, because I don't necessarily expect the same sort of reading of, a chess player, a man who's sitting, with his legs spread wide with a glass of whiskey, that costs whatever, and a cigar that costs like, I don't know, $100, and so I think there's something around in the way that we are perhaps uncomfortable with women taking up space in that way and women claiming pleasure, luxury for themselves, because I think part of us in that story of an underdog requires some sense of suffering. And I think that's, that's how we frame hard work, right? And I think even myself, right, as I'm critiquing that, I think part of me also watching the show was just like, oh, Beth, like you're just like spending money, and I was kind of just like, you're winning, but like, is this really the quote unquote responsible thing to do?
Well, I remember having the same impression, because it's like, she just basically the moment where she has to make this decision of like how she gets to Russia essentially. And she turns down the church group because they basically want her to do a rah-rah America thing and also Christianity, which she just is like, no, I'm not going to do that. Like, I kind of was going like, isn't all the money you just spent renovating your house probably would have gotten you to Russia? Right. I had that moment. I'm like, but wait a second. Like, it also was like, okay, but that also feels like a very like classist reaction of like placing a value judgment of like, no, actually the money she's just spent to kind of like, I mean, I saw like her interior redecorating actually very much as a like, this is how I'm going to cope with what's going on in my life, whether it's responsible or not. And I'm like, no, actually that's like, whether the individual purchases of the things don't matter. It's the process of like taking, like, I'm going to take control of this house. And especially like she mentioned several times, like taking care of something, where she's never really taken care of something, I think, intentionally prior to that. And like, it is, even though on the surface it seems very like kind of frivolous, I think, to a lot of viewers, and like including I had my initial reaction, even though I'm very much like, yes, buy the velvet couch.
Yeah, that was nice.
I mean, who doesn't want a velvet couch? I want a velvet couch. But there, like, I do think like we're like it's hard to simultaneously. I find it difficult to simultaneously be like, okay, there's this tension between consumer culture being this kind of cathartic like way of dealing with her problems.
Not only consumer culture, I think it ties back to what Anastasia was saying about like femininity, because I think that there's this weird thing where I'm going to push back on what Anastasia said in order to agree with her slightly, because it's weird. Because I think
classic move.
No. Well, the exact opposite of it. Because I don't think it's fair to say that men don't do it. I mean, clearly I do. That's Steph's criticism of me, is that I revel in my class mobility by buying shit, right? That's like,
I meant to say that you wouldn't be read the same way. Like, it's not to say that you don't do it.
Exactly.
Like,
because I think that what people miss, like not you, not us, but I think the people who are complaining about like how constructed Beth's beauty is in this show versus what they perceive it in the book, is they're ignoring how much of a fucking cartoon character Benny is. Benny is a scrawny chess player who's turned himself into John fucking Wayne.
Yep, he's awesome.
And I think he's amazing, but that is a completely and he wears the same outfit in every scene, like for over the course of several years. And I was like, dude made a choice that he's wearing a leather duster and a cowboy hat. And
he looks insane.
Like, he's living in New York and he's hanging out in Cincinnati. Why are you dressed like that? Because that's a visual choice, and I don't think we criticize men the same way which I think is what Anastasia was getting at. We don't,
like aesthetic eccentricities. I think, like, to go to Asana's point, like when we're talking about narratives of genius, we often see in men aesthetic eccentricity as a marker of genius. Like, I remember Humphrey Davy, who's like a famous like genius chemist from the 19th century, like was famous for wearing velvet suits to perform experiments. Like, we have like ongoing cultural narratives where like men, like, even if it's like not necessarily positive, it's not like they look good. It's just like the guy who wears the same t-shirt every day kind of thing.
He's got a thing. Look at him. He's got a thing going.
Like, in kind of the same way that Benny does. Like, I imagine Benny owns two of the exact same shirt, probably not washed as frequently as maybe I would like, based off the state of his apartment, but that's okay. But when we see, because I think that the thing that's complicated about Beth is because she has an eccentricity, but it's not falling into the same stereotype as the book sounds like it does, where it's like she's a plain Jane obsessed with only mental development. She's not interested in like stereotypical feminine, like markers of femininity.
Ultra fem markers of femininity too, in her case.
Right. And as soon as you put those two things together with like I think like we talked about in a previous show, like Marvelous Miss Maisel, who different thing because she's like very wealthy living in Manhattan, but she basically, like, if you imagine basically the story of Beth, and then Beth sees Miss Maisel, who actually is living around the same time, as the aspirational. They different universe, but if they live in the same universe, we're gonna go what they do, and eventually they have a chess comedian thing somewhere. Miss Maisel is impersonating a chess player, and that's what's happening. But no, if you see like if she's seeing Miss Maisel's fashion, in the magazines, is like, that's aspirational. That's the kind of person I want to be. Because Miss Maisel also very much does the same thing. If she constructs identity, like her outfit choices are, and this is also just like the craft of costuming in a TV show or movie, like her costume choices are very intentional. And even though that's true of any movie or television show, because hello, costume department. In both Marvelous Miss Maisel and in the Queen's Gambit, those are made to be intentional choices by the character as well. Like, Beth is self-constructing. And also, there's a few articles, again, sewing people, because this is how we do, like, talking about the way that, like, if you're presuming that Beth's clothing choices are strategic, that they are actually part of the chess match, then it's actually part of basically, like, the larger metagame. Both in sort of like gaining her own confidence, but arguably also like because there are points at which you could argue that, like, whether she's doing it intentionally or not, like the fact that she is very feminine presenting makes her opponents underestimate her so she can win.
I think she absolutely does intentionally, because she says so. I think she's aware of the metagame. And I think there's a couple of really
and she
specific
likes playing
points.
the metagame.
Yeah, well, there's
Like,
two
she
real
gets
specific
pleasure
points
out of
where she
it.
does it that like really point out to me. First was with Benny, where she talks about like the character that he has constructed for himself. She's like, "What's with the knife, dude?" And he's like, "Well, it's for protection." And she's like, "From what? You're a chess player." She like literally calls him out on it, and it makes fun of it. And then you find out the next morning she kicked his ass, and he's like, "I can't believe it. Less than 30 moves. What happened?" You know, like so that's that first time where she does it at the I think it's the World Championships or whatever. The first time she beats Benny, but also in Mexico she does it with the kid, with the 12-year-old boy, the great, who's studying for your grandmaster, and it's like because I think that's where she realizes, he's nice and she's friendly with him because she's a kid that she sees herself in. She sees is who I was as a kid. But like her being the sexy girl playing chess isn't working there. She does a little bit of flirting with the guys and with guys, lesser players in different tournaments, but it doesn't really work on the kid. So she does this mind game where she keeps walking away from the board while he's trying to play a very serious chess game. And she's like, she'll walk away and be bored. And then like she'll be stretching. And it's like, and she's just doing that to fuck the kid's concentration over. It's actually a really mean trick, and it was brilliant in the context of the show. And just I'll compare it to Stephanie. You've seen me do this when I play poker sometimes. When we play in a Hold'em tournament. When I get to a point where there's a certain point where I'm playing purely based on math because of I've calculated how much money I have versus how much the other person is. Like Steph, you've seen me play blind hands before, where like for 2 or 3 hands in a row, I'll just bet without looking at my cards because I've already figured out what I'm going to bet for the next 2 or 3 hands. So it doesn't matter what my hands are. And so it's a trick. It's a part of the trick I learned by studying poker and learning how the math worked, learning how other people's games work. And I can only do it in certain situations. But the game can get to a point where I know I can play 3 hands in a row without looking. And so I'll do it just to fuck over the other person's concentration. And I think that she's doing that. It's not, it's kind of a screwing with the game. And if she can screw with the game by just wearing a busty top, she will.
But she never wears anything revealing, anything busty.
No, she does. She
very rarely. I don't remember her wearing anything that was revealing, distracting in that way.
She's not in a bikini, but
my interpretation. Her clothes were to me. They seemed very rich, like they were good fabrics, very nice
sexy
fitting.
Yeah, it's also like it's very much a period of 1960s fashion too. Yeah. Because we actually, which we actually see in the show, even though it's not commented on, you see in the early 60s as she's like a teenager, you see like the full circle skirts that were much more reminiscent of the 50s. By the end, she's wearing mini shift dresses. Like this is where we start seeing the beginning of the mini skirt, which is very much about women. So I think revealing by 2020 standards, probably not.
Right.
I think revealing by 60s standards, especially in the context of a male-dominated space, maybe. But I think part of also what it is, it's like the clothes are not sexy because they're revealing. The clothes are sexy because she's not expected to be feminine, and she is very feminine.
Right.
And it's in high contrast to the people around her who are not only men, but they're not very. They're not very fashion-forward men. It's not just that they're men. It's they're not.
They're kind of frumpy.
Yeah, they're not doing the same kind of aesthetic grooming that they are. Because even Benny, who does, it's in a very anti-fashion way. I don't know how else to say that.
Yeah.
He's a decade out of fashion, and
I don't think he ever was in. I don't think that was ever.
Well, no, he's a decade and 150 pounds away from where he needs to be in order to make that look work. Because he's trying to be John Wayne.
A Western movie.
Yeah, he's trying to be John Wayne from a movie from 10 years before, and he doesn't look like that. He looks like a 12-year-old boy. In true form, I believe we have solved nothing other than maybe don't wear a Wild West duster unless it's contextually appropriate, and or you are a literal genius. I own 2 of them.
Of course you do.
Only one's leather.
It's okay. I have a top hat that I occasionally wear casually, so.
Oh, this has been great. I mean, there's so much going on. What we've resolved for me is I think everybody should watch the show, even though we've talked about it. I think it's worth watching again for us.
Oh, absolutely. I plan to. I need to do some more sewing planning, so.
There's more pandemic time to kill.
Yeah.
Anastasia, thank you for joining us. It's nice meeting you.
Thanks for having me. This was so much fun. I loved it.
Yeah. Anything you want to plug or promote?
Not particularly, but would love to continue this conversation with y'all and anyone who's listening. You can find me on social media under my name or my handle, which is MZFAYYA.
That'll be linked in the show notes.
Yeah.
And Stephanie?
I don't really have anything to kind of between jobs right now. So try to find something. If you want to hire a cognitive psychologist, then, I'm on Facebook. Send me a DM.
And Katya.
As always, you can find me on Instagram at justthatnerdkid. Mostly so in content, if I'm honest. But if you too like 1960s fashion, there'll probably be more of it on there soon.
Absolutely.
Also cats.
I mean, who doesn't like cats? You can follow me on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, all the places, always at Chris Maverick. You can follow the show on all of social media at Vox Popcast. And you can follow the show's blog at www.voxpopcast.com, where you can not only comment on this show and give us your thoughts about Queen's Gambit and everything that we've said, but you can comment on our next show that we haven't even talked about yet. We post calls for comments where we ask you for thoughts of things that, we're going to be talking about so that we can research, we can look into ideas, and we can sort of respond to them and as we talk on the show. If you enjoy the show, and we certainly hope you do, please subscribe to us on iTunes or Stitcher or Spotify or wherever the hell you get podcasts from. And do us a favor, leave us a 5-star review, especially on Apple Podcasts or iTunes. That really helps the show. It makes the algorithm privilege us, makes other people find the show, makes us happy, especially happy if you don't just leave a rating, but if you leave a 5-star review, if you write a little something about what you like about the show. That not only moves us up the iTunes algorithms, but it gives us something to do. And you could be the first review of 2021. And oh my God, how is it 2021? This is so weird.
Make that New Year's resolution.
Yeah, there you go. New Year's resolution should be write a review for that quirky little Marxist show.
And they say that if you get a quick, easy win, it's easier to build momentum, and it'll literally take you less than 5 minutes.
That's right. Absolutely. Start 2021 off right. This is your chance to make the year better than last year. Like you could be. You are the straw on the camel's back. That makes 2021 better than 2020, and it all starts with writing a review for Vox Popcast. And also do us a favor, subscribe to our new YouTube channel. It's not even new anymore. We've been doing it for a few months now, but subscribe to our YouTube channel that's linked in the show notes. That how do you say? Because we're really trying to build the channel over there. You can listen to the show, but you can also see images about all the stuff that we're talking about. Kind of, this one probably we're going to show a lot of weird fashion and maybe stills from the show or not. I don't know. Depends on how much time I have to put into it when I'm editing it. We'll see. You just watched it on YouTube. Let us know in the comments whether or not you liked the YouTube version, and press like and subscribe and hit bells. And I don't know. I'm not a millennial. I don't really understand how YouTube works. Katya, do that for me.
Like, subscribe, and ring the bell.
Thank you. I would like to thank
millennial life.
There you go. I would like to thank Maximilian of Thoughtform Music for our epic theme song, building ever so more epically and playing us out. I'd like to thank you at home for listening. I'd like to thank Stephanie and Anastasia for joining us. And we'll see you next time. Happy New Year. Bye.
This put three things against her. Lutsenko having the white pieces, his still unstopped attack, and that extra allotment of time. So it was all the more impressive when she beat him with 25 minutes still on her clock.